Hello and welcome. I'm Nitin Gokhale and you are on StratNews Global. While India has been bombarded daily with the day-to-day developments on the line of actual control and the problems that troops on either side are facing as the harsh winter approaches in the high altitude area of Ladakh, there is also a need to look beyond the immediate happenings on the border and take a comprehensive look at the India-China relationship and where do we go from here, especially because this crisis has lasted for more than 5 months, longer than any recent crisis between India and China, which of course may alter the geopolitical situation and some equations in the region, as well as will have ripple effect on the globe. So to discuss the larger picture, I have with me two very eminent panelists. To my right, General Dipankar Banerjee, eminent China watcher, has been watching China since 1991, visiting China frequently, interacting with top Chinese leadership, and of course a military officer who's served in the border areas with China. To my left, Air Marshal Arjun Subramaniam, who is an author now, a historian, a military historian, two very big books under his belt, and of course an ace Air Force pilot. Welcome both of you to this program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for
Good to be
taking
here.
time to come here. General Banerjee, let me start with you. There has been a feeling that since 1993, India and China had carefully constructed a kind of framework between the two countries for maintaining peace and tranquility on the border, and looking at the relationship from a higher perspective, keeping aside the differences on the border, and just trying to maintain peace and tranquility there. Does this particular standoff, which started in early May and still continuing as we speak, does it fundamentally alter that equation or that particular approach that both countries have taken?
Well, the Indo-China relations are now at a crossroads. One former foreign secretary has called it the end of a chapter. I think it's at a turning point. And that's why I think it's time to reflect and see as to why this is so. One, of course, the principal reason is that between two major countries, emerging countries now, we don't have a settled border. And hence, without a settled border, the point of friction increases. Now, why is it so? One, of course, India never had a border with China. Our border is with Tibet. And with Tibet, India-Tibet relations had historically been always very peaceful, stable, and cordial. And as you know, Guru Padmasambhava, who went to Tibet in 8th century and was called there by the Tibetan monks, he's considered the second Dalai Lama in their anthology. And because of that, those relations, the borders were never clearly delineated, but both sides knew as to where it stood. Now, hence, afterwards, as we emerged into the current era, all the developments that take place, Chinese aggression and reconquest of Tibet, and then sovereignty there, and in a sense, sovereignty subsequently, as we allowed them to exercise. And so that changed the relationship significantly. At the time, attempts were made to resolve this border issue, and Zhou Enlai asked for some more time in order to study all the documents, etc., etc. And then he said that he'll come back and come to this thing. And Pandit Nehru allowed that to continue. As a result, as we came to the 1962 situation, just before that, intrusions began to take place. The road construction from Xinjiang to Lhasa, and Tibetan, the PLA presence in Tibet, and that began to change the relationship, and hence we had the 1962 war. After that, our relations were frozen for a significant amount of time, till resumed in 1976 with the exchange of ambassadors. And after that, attempts were made to come to an understanding regarding our border situation. We had significant confidence-building measures put in place at that time with Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988, the Peace and Tranquility Agreement in 1993, military confidence-building measures in 1996, etc., etc. But without a settled border, many of these were being impeded. It could not be taken forward. Now, in spite of that, we managed to improve relations and interactions at all other levels. And hence, relations improved. But without resolving this fundamental question, it could not take a substantially better turn. And that is the realization and the reality today. So currently what do we have? We have a disputed line of actual control. The other side accepts it. It has not been resolved. Issues, and we need not go into the details of it, much written about, but we don't have an agreed line of actual control. There are significant reasons for it. But the point is, without such an agreed line delineating the border between two sovereign nations, conflicts such as this are likely to happen.
Bound to happen.
And so that is what we are seeing now. With road infrastructure improving, both sides, China always had better ones, and our ability to patrol those areas. So conflict is building up. And so that tension has now boiled over. And of course, we've had a significant change in the perception of the Chinese leadership and their orientation to the world, the way they look at the world.
Right.
I think I'll probably come back to that later.
But I just wanted to, because Arjun's just written a great book on India's conflicts and wars from 72 onwards till 2020. In fact, you've included part of it in the book also. Now, everyone's now talking about trying to put in place some new confidence building measures. In fact, the joint statement talks about new confidence building measures between Wang Yi and Dr. Jaishankar. We have had a slew of agreements, a slew of protocols, and yet we're seeing the situation that we are seeing now in Ladakh, and maybe it will go further. So what, in your view, as somebody who studied various conflicts, various wars, and of course China forms a major part of it, what would you think has led to the current situation?
Fundamentally, I believe that the Chinese have been laying an excellent smokescreen from a long time. And that emerges from Mao's 5 fingers concept that he propounded for very long. And those 5 fingers are very clear. Arunachal or southern Tibet, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal and Ladakh. And therefore, if there is a long-term proposition to set right historical legacies and operationalize the 5 finger strategy, obviously a systematic encroachment into these 5 areas is part of a larger game plan. So if ever we've seen periods of peace and tranquility, I would like to look at it as an elaborate smokescreen, a long-term smokescreen that has been laid on. Because if you look at any major decisive outcomes of geopolitical strategies that the Chinese have woven, it all ends up in a certain amount of the use of force.
Sure.
And therefore, the way I look at it is that diplomacy is used by the Chinese as a smokescreen, and in the meantime, they build comprehensive power, and that actually fits into Deng's strategy also of bide your time and hide your strengths until people are willing to unroll those strengths.
Right.
So I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in that entire process.
Reading of China?
Not only reading of China, I think there needs to be some mechanism by which the Chinese realize that hitherto strategies may not work anymore with India, because India is now a power of consequence.
Right.
And do we need to sort of shed some of the baggage of history and to get down onto the ground and do some hard demarcation based on a certain amount of give and take?
Of course.
I mean to say, jingoism will not work. So therefore, I think, and I've written in a couple of pieces, that highly unlikely, but I think one needs to see a spark of brilliant statesmanship from both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi to see whether they can shed the baggage of history and move forward on the border issues. I don't think the time, I don't think we can do with any more of these protocols and agreements. Your perception of the line of actual control, my perception of the line of actual
Overlaps in many places.
overlaps. 20 places, I mean to say, correct me if I'm
23,
wrong. There are
exactly,
23 places where there is a mismatch in the Chinese perception of the LAC and our perception of the LAC.
Correct.
And this mismatch is a result of mismatched strengths.
True.
Obviously, wherever the Chinese see that they can demonstrate strength, the mismatch is against the Indian topography.
Correct.
So I think something really, something out of the box,
No, you're
and
right.
something visionary has to come up.
You're right, of course, and I've been saying this since 2012 that we need to, the Indian leadership needs to prepare the citizens for an eventual give and take. I think that is what is missing in India's strategy.
You know, Nitin, this is something that is so true. If you recollect, one of the reasons probably for the 1962 war was that Nehru was unable to control jingoism within
And the spiral.
And the spiral.
And the spiral, yeah.
Now, I don't know whether the political situation is ripe enough for a bipartisan agreement on China.
Well, I think we will have to debate on that.
Yeah.
But sir, I want to bring you in on a very fundamental question. Because the Chinese civilizational view of itself is that we are the middle kingdom.
That's
we
right.
are the center
That's
of
right.
the world, and every other state on the periphery must pay a tribute, or there
That's
should be a
right.
vassal state.
That's right.
So does it drive the strategy is driven from that?
In this context of national sovereignty and border alignments, a new issue gets intruded into the system, which is the Chinese characteristics.
Exactly.
And this Chinese characteristic, Chinese big civilizations, large civilizations, ancient, have a different idea, different concept of the world order and how they see the world. In the Chinese concept, it is the concept of the Tianxia. Tianxia, which is the middle kingdom syndrome.
Exactly.
That is the son of heaven concept. That the king emperor in Beijing is the son of heaven with a mandate to rule over the world, to keep the barbarians below at bay. That's what been the Chinese approach to international relations. Henry Kissinger explained it to me very well, and two of his books, one is on China, the other on world order.
Right.
He explains this very well. So therefore, in the Chinese context, everybody else is subordinate.
Exactly.
They're obliged to pay tribute, pay obeisance, listen to the emperor there. And so therefore, an equitable world order is something which China cannot really civilizationally accept. On the other hand, how do we visualize the world?
Exactly.
You see, our concept in our ancient scriptures,
Vasudhaiva
kutumbakam. The whole world is one family.
That's right.
Whole world is one family in peace and harmony. Therefore, yours and mine does not really matter so much, as it is our responsibility, collective responsibility. So these two ideas conflict against each other.
Fundamental conflict.
And that makes it more difficult, just as Arjun was saying, to agree on a line of actual control or a border between two countries. Yet, this is the fundamental context. We have got a concept that we have got to come to an agreement about. Without a significant, clear understanding of where the boundary lies, whose jurisdiction lies where, you cannot impose confidence-building measures.
Sure.
Confidence-building measures, as was laid down in 1996, the idea suggested, China suggested many of these, certain length, certain distance from the border that you've got to withdraw certain forces,
Right.
certain equipment, and things like that. Those could not be implemented because the line itself was not finalized.
Exactly.
And I again suggest that a time should come that this can only work out a degree of compromise and understanding. And under the 2005 agreement on the principles of a resolution, we could probably do
Political
that.
parameters that were talked about.
So we could probably do that.
Yes, but this is the other thing. I mean, I think India has been asking for clarification of the LAC
Absolutely.
For quite some time, but the Chinese haven't really responded to it. Now, so what is the way forward? I mean, General Banerjee has just said that there has to be a kind of a new modus vivendi, let's say, or a compromise with both sides agree to. But if one side is not willing to clarify, then this fundamental conflict will always create complications, like it has. But I think, like what you said in your first reply, that China is also seeing a new India in a way, that where there's this a resolute kind of standoff or standing firm on the border, while still continuing with reasonableness in diplomacy. Is that the way forward?
No, I think that's the first step. But I suspect that is something that the Chinese are willing to play along for quite some time.
Okay.
And if they are willing, and this is the concept currently that is the flavor all across the world, all measures short of war. So the Chinese are most comfortable with all measures short of war.
Winning without fighting.
They are not comfortable with war.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not saying that we Indians are comfortable with war. But the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force is more used to taking attrition and causing attrition.
And bloodshed.
Which is something that the Chinese have at the back of their mind. And I heard a very interesting combination of things that makes sense. One is this one-child policy has made the Chinese extremely apprehensive about losing people.
Right.
Okay. And the second is, in order to cater for reduced attrition, most of their operational plans are looking at long-range vectors, are looking at
non-kinetic,
non-contact warfare. And so, therefore, this operational cat and mouse will always go on. But I am quite certain that if this current standoff kind of a situation continues for much longer, I think that would be playing into the Chinese playbook. But does that mean that India needs to be proactive when it comes to precipitating a situation? Even that is not correct.
Correct.
And even that is not. So it's a Hobson's choice.
Absolutely.
That both China and India face.
Right.
And by being the lesser power, I think the longer this standoff takes place, I think India would be at a greater disadvantage than China to be able to cope with a prolonged standoff. But having said that, don't forget Sundaram Chu
went on for 9 years.
Went on for a long time, and we didn't blink.
Yeah.
So
of course, the quantum and the scope and the quantum of that standoff was much smaller than what it was in terms of the number of troops right now involved, or the frontage that is involved. But sir, you want to respond to what Arjun said?
Yes, I agree with Arjun entirely that a situation of war between India and China is not desirable.
Right.
Neither side can win a war, even though we must not be afraid of confronting one should the need arises.
Sure.
And of course, in that context, the whole equation between India and China on the border areas are quite distinctly different, and the situation has changed dramatically. But nevertheless, we have to now look around as to how we could have a more stable relationships by addressing the questions in our border areas. And of course, along with that, we'll probably come to the discussions on this later, the global situation.
I was just coming to that. In fact, that, from Japan to Bhutan, China has been aggressive. It's not just as if India is the victim or India is the only country where they are showing aggression, belligerence. You look at East China Sea, South China Sea, even tiny Bhutan is not spared. Every day there are reports about how the PLA is coming and destroying and demolishing the Royal Bhutanese army outposts and putting pressure on tiny Bhutan. Of course, that is linked to India. So, is this born out of President Xi's desire to be leader of the world? The G2 concept that was there, and then they are thinking that America is a declining power, we are a rising power, and when this happens, there is inevitably a contest, and therefore anybody who tries to get close to the US needs to be punished. A message has to be sent.
In the Tianxia concept, that was inevitable. The Chinese will and wish to dominate, be the number one power in the world, was inevitable.
Correct.
But, in 1988, Deng Xiaoping had laid down his dictum.
The 24
character this thing, where keep your head low, bide the time, and prepare.
Build your strength.
Build your strength in the meanwhile and wait for that later.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's very interesting to note that just at that time, why Deng Xiaoping did that down? After Tiananmen incident, all this thing, China was at back foot.
Right.
Globally, communism was
Retreating.
in retreat. Eastern Europe communist parties were disintegrating.
Yes.
Soviet Union disintegrated just 2 years later, and so therefore the time was quite different.
Yes.
And hence they wanted to wait and see out this. But three things happened. One was the US economic collapse in 2008-9. The conduct of Olympics by China in 2008, and I didn't go to that, but when there's soon after that, the best Olympics ever conducted. Maximum number of gold medals won by China that hold this thing. 1st of October 2009 was a
60th anniversary.
60th anniversary parade. Massive parade. All weapons displayed in that parade was indigenously made in China. The next year, 2010, was a World Trade Fair
In Shanghai, yes.
I witnessed that. For that, what a massive demonstration of industrial wealth. That was Hu Jintao's period.
Yes.
And that gave it a fillip. And as soon as Xi Jinping came in 1992 end, by then, of course, the book had come out on the Chinese dream, a colonel from the National Defense University training team.
Yes.
And that was the flavor in China.
Yes.
And Xi Jinping played on it.
Correct. 2021 and 2049.
And played on it, and all these centenary goals, etc. And the objectives clearly laid out, and that's how it all began.
Correct.
And so now we are seeing a different China. And that is where it is absolutely imperative for us to understand what that new China is all about, understand its strengths and weaknesses, and also learn how to deal with them. That is a challenge that confronts India today.
I think, but India has also changed fundamentally, right? I mean, demonstrated in Doklam, in Chumar in 2014, Doklam in 2017. And I think like one former army commander said, when has military pressure worked on India? I mean, you can have prolonged standoffs on the border, but that doesn't fundamentally alter India's behavior. And particularly in the last 5-6 years, despite the bonhomie or perceived bonhomie, I think there have been fundamental aggression that the Chinese have done. And I think India hasn't succumbed to it fully. I mean, they've come at India on the NSG issue, on the Masood Azhar issue. They've sort of denied India UN Security Council seat. They continue to do that. And yet India continues to raise its profile the world over. Is that one of the reasons why the Chinese are also trying to put us down?
Nitin, that's a very valid point. And whenever I spoke to Chinese scholars or American scholars specialized in China when I was in the US, all of them said one thing very clearly: India doesn't figure in the Chinese consciousness at all. At that time, I had a proposition. I said, I don't think that's the case.
I agree with you. And I'll say that later why I say that.
And I don't think that's the case. So then they would say, why? I said, here's my hypothesis. China looks at the United States as its principal adversary.
True.
And therefore, any capability that it builds with a focus on the United States of America can comfortably be shifted southwards towards India should push comes to shove.
Sure.
So China does not need to articulate India as an adversary, but by no means does it not consider India to be an adversary. India is an adversary, it is a competitor, but the Chinese playbook says that let's keep India guessing by not telling the world that we think that India is a threat to us. Exactly. Because then that dilutes my own competitiveness vis-a-vis the United States of America. Now look at what Xi is up to right now, or what he's facing. If I were to put myself in Xi's shoes, I think I would be extremely troubled, because I set out to show something over a period of time, and in October when they meet for the plenary session, he has to have something concrete to tell the Chinese people. He's faced resistance from the Japanese, he's faced resistance from the
Philippines?
Taiwanese,
Yeah.
from Philippines. He's facing resistance from India. His BRI initiative is floundering.
Exactly.
So the thing is that I think she's strategy of using brute force and wanting to be feared is actually backfiring on him. Whereas actually what he should have done is that he should have created a strategy wherein he's not only feared, but also China is respected. For China to
Which is
become
not
a great
happening.
power,
Yeah.
it needs to be respected. And unfortunately, it's not.
That's not happening. Yeah, I think he's also made himself a target of internal attacks by appointing himself a leader for life, or taking away the limits to his term.
Fundamentally, I think she's understanding of power is spot on.
Yeah,
Probably operationalizing
that understanding.
the exercise of power
Right.
has sort
Exactly.
of floundered a bit.
That's true.
This
But
prematurely giving up the bide your time principle is what is now at the downfall, potential weakness of China today, and that of Xi Jinping, as you quite rightly mentioned.
in fact,
Now, I would agree, firstly, I would strongly support my, over the last 30 odd years, interacting with the Chinese, this concept that India does not feature as a peer competitor for China. Very clearly so. That changed after Doklam.
Yes.
That changed after Doklam when, in their experience elsewhere, whether in South China Sea or elsewhere, where China attempted to do something, the opposition was very minimal. Nobody could really strongly oppose that movement. At Doklam, that did not happen.
Right.
Indian forces stood up. And that came up as a surprise to them. In some respects, after that Doklam incident, we had a very serious meeting at Chengdu, hosted by the Chinese, the top Chinese generals, as well as our Indian delegation. And we had a frank discussion. And this is what came out very strongly in that. And in some sense, that particular sense is related to this year's happening as well. And so this was, in a sense, trying to feel out the Indian capability in the Ladakh region.
Yeah. In fact, I would think that there was multiple messages, and I actually want to say this, that one very prominent China watcher in the Indian establishment said this to me. He said till 2017, and to support Arjun's hypothesis on how they were studying US, they were more engaged with the US, they had taken their eyes off the ball as far as India was concerned. In their academic and their think tank and their own fundamental intellectual capabilities that they had built about the US.
The only way they looked at India.
Yes.
So India, in partnership with the USA, is a significant challenge which China cannot handle now.
Right.
And that is what scares them. Not India in itself, it is marginalized somewhat the way that we look at Bangladesh, for example.
True.
It's a challenge in a sense,
Yes.
but does it pose any military threat to India?
No.
No. That is a relationship that I would suggest in my 3-4 decades of interaction with them. That's what I felt.
Correct.
But India, US together, they cannot handle.
Correct.
Now, in that sense, in that relationship, they would like to prevent that from coming about in any way or any way that they can. And that is a principal challenge for them.
Sure.
Only other issue that I would like to discuss with you is that currently it will be incorrect on our part to assume that China is necessarily weakened by all the challenges that it's facing globally.
I don't think
It is facing global challenges, and there's no doubt about that. And that is a failure of Xi's policies,
correct.
for which he will be paying a heavy price
Internal.
in the political situation within the country.
Right.
Let there be absolutely no doubt about it.
Correct.
And, well, let him handle
Yeah.
it however he would like to handle it. And I don't think China is in a position to take on the whole world
Right.
at the same time as it's trying to do now. And that is where opportunity comes for us
I
to
think
also exploit the situation
True.
and how we can prepare for that challenge. But ultimately, of course, I would like to only highlight one thing, that we have to develop our own capability.
I was just coming to that.
Develop our own capability very substantially, strategically, politically, diplomatically, economically, and all-round capability.
Right.
That is what will ultimately deter China.
Because they respect strength ultimately. But I also say this, that, and I've said this earlier and written about it, that China has perhaps overreached itself 10 years too early. I don't know whether you agree, but your final thoughts on where we are headed now, India-China relations.
A couple of till very recently, I think it was we thought that we needed to balance and hedge against China.
Sure.
Now I think one needs to reflect on what Ashley Tullis mentioned about 10 years ago, that the US has evolved a policy of congagement, both containing and engaging China.
Together. Yeah.
I think now with India also developing multiple capabilities, I think we also need to look at sort of both containing and engaging China.
True.
With a clear understanding that any rapid movement forward in bilateral relations or in trade cannot be divorced from the boundary question.
Exactly.
And the other point militarily also, which is important, is that by keeping us engaged on continental boundaries, I think what China is also looking at is to see whether it can impede maritime capability development, because it's the maritime domain that it's more worried about
And vulnerable in.
than the
in.
continental.
True. Your final thoughts on where are we headed as far as India-China relations are concerned?
Now, of course, the immediate situation.
Right.
The immediate situation, I think we had a very strong forward movement in the Moscow agreement between the Foreign Secretary and Wang Yi. That's a very positive statement. 5-point agenda.
Sure.
No induction of additional forces into the operational area.
Right.
Plus 5 points. Did disengagement and withdrawal. Enhancing our confidence building measures, reducing tensions all around,
Sure.
and then trying to find out a way of engaging with each other through dialogue and discussion.
Right.
I think confidence building measures subsequent to agreeing on a modus vivendi on the line of actual control.
Right.
Whether we agree on the line of actual control or not, we have to agree on a modus vivendi on the line of actual control.
Sure.
We cannot go on
Having this
fighting on the
conflict,
line of actual
yeah.
control again and again.
True.
That will lead to conflict, which of course neither side wants.
Yes.
So if you are successful in managing that dimension, then there's a possibility that we can put in place additional confidence building measures and then diffuse that situation for a time being.
Right.
But the overall challenge of dealing with China as a long term will remain with us. And for us to do a lot of deep thinking as to how we can do that in a comprehensive way.
I think so, and that is the fundamental question that is, I think, faced by Indian decision makers. It's a complicated situation. It's a relationship that is not easy to manage. And of course, it has got various dimensions where geopolitics comes in, India's standing in the global order comes in, and China's own desire to be seen as a rising power or the only power in Asia comes in. All those factors will determine how India and China move forward as they try and resolve the current standoff or the current tension between the two, and also look for new ways of engaging with each other. That's all we have time for. But thank you very much, both of you, for sparing your time and giving us very insightful comments, and your experience shows, both of you, on studying China and of course looking at how India and China can move forward. Thanks very much.